this is a tough environment, and I'm sure that's one of the things clients are coming to you and asking you how to kind of market in this environment where all of a sudden you went from one extreme where some people were booking a year in advance because they were worried about going on vacation after COVID and everything was filled up, now to how do I manage my ADR, booking calendar, and booking rules when the booking window is shrinking. What kind of advice are you giving them at this point? Because you have people that are absolutely freaked out and panicking, and part of the panicking is about being able to cover payroll and other expenses. Like, all their costs have increased, and yet the revenue is just dropping.
From rags to riches, I ain't dumb. I got 99 problems, but
Welcome to the Crossfires. You've tuned into another episode of Straight Fire VR. Today's guests speak on the lowered ADR, shortened stays, as well as rising cost. Joining us today is an expert on the topic. He's the co-founder and chief revenue officer at Shortcuts, Jeff Robertson. Also joining the panel today is the regional director of business development at V-Trips, as well as the co-host at Straight Fire VR, Miriam Ramsey. Opening the line of fire is our host, Steve Milo, CEO and founder at V-Trips. Steve, when you are ready, take charge.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Straight Fire VR. Thank you, Heather, for wonderful production work. And I wanted to start off with our returning guest, Jeff Robertson. And partly why I wanted to have you on, Jeff, is because we talked about kind of a headwinds last time you were on. At that point, we're given a lot of advice out, and then it looks like things have gone to the worst. And some of the data is really, really bad. So as everyone is aware, Vacasa announced their Q4 earnings. They said gross booking value was down 19%, and that's a combination of 15% drop in ADR over 2023 for the Q4 and 5% reduction of occupied nights. So just a huge reduction of overall gross value, or what some people call RevPAR. Jay Sprinkle also in a previous episode on Straight Fire VR that occupied nights for 2024 were coming in 10% lower than 2019, which is incredible if you think about it. So that would put us probably back in the 2014, 2015 range, which was not great times for people. And then meanwhile, as you're aware, Jeff, everyone's costs have increased, labor being the biggest variable. So I'm just curious what you're hearing out there, because I'm starting to hear real concern by property managers that this is going to be a real bad situation.
Yeah. Well, Steve, thanks for having me back on the program. I'm excited to be here. Yeah, you're right. 3 or 4 months ago when we were talking about the uncertainty of 2024 and how we were expecting it to be more challenging. I think all that I've been hearing from the folks I've been talking to is, yeah, it's really here. It's really impacting our ability to meet our plan, even though may have started as a slightly pessimistic plan for 2024, at least compared to 2023. A couple months ago, there was always that hope, I guess, that, we're still going to be better than 2019. So we're still, on a trajectory up and to the right overall. We just had these outlier years because of COVID. Well, I think we are really beginning to see the impacts of the economy, inflation, job layoffs. Perhaps, I'm sure that's affecting travelers' willingness to take vacations. We're seeing it show up in some of the data now. So I can't say I'm necessarily surprised, but I think the seriousness of the situation and the attention that property managers and even suppliers are having to pay to what's unfolding this year, it's really a serious thing, and it requires some concerted effort and some focus to help fight against that tide or that headwind that you talk about.
So Miriam, I was just in Gatlinburg, actually in Smoky Cove. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then after Gatlinburg, I flew over to Washington, D.C. and drove up to Deep Creek and did a little mini tour after meeting with a couple of people there. I was shocked in a way by all the new construction. There was so much new construction. That was the same thing I saw in Smoky Cove. Granted, we're doing some new construction, but all over Smoky Cove, there was new construction. And it seems like that's part of the quote problem is all of the supply that's entered the market trying to grab dollars. And at this point, it's eating up people's ADR and in some cases occupied nights. I mean, you've seen that in your area, right?
Oh yeah, no, we've seen we've seen about a 20% increase in building new construction and new inventory listed. I think that definitely affects the ADR. But also it affects, supply and demand. We are seeing a diversity on what guests are booking, and it's not always the new construction. We have some units in our portfolio that some of their older units are doing just as well, if not better, than the new construction. But I think it goes back to the direct booking and having that longevity on the websites. But look, increase on building stuff's coming up more and more every day. So
Yeah. So Jeff, I mean, 2023 was tough. I sent you a slide deck from Key Data. It showed occupied nights down about 2%, which in and of itself doesn't sound a lot, but that's 2%, which is about 5% off. But then ADR took a hit too. This year, if occupied nights are down 10%, and it may not end up that way. We are certainly seeing some data that shows the booking window is starting to slow down. But ADR is coming down as well. And I guess as you're talking to clients and you're talking to other property managers, what kind of advice are you giving them at this point? Because my guess is you have people that are absolutely freaked out and panicking. And part of the panic is about being able to cover payroll and other expenses. Like, all their costs have increased, and yet the revenue is just dropping.
Yeah, I think, looking at evaluating distribution strategy is a really important thing to continually do, particularly now. I've heard from several property managers that their performance on Verbo has dramatically changed this first quarter compared to previous quarters, down 10, 15, 20% from what they were expecting. So, keeping your finger on the pulse of where you're distributing your properties, perhaps the number of distribution channels that you're listing your properties on. You can't afford to put all your eggs in one basket, particularly with these month-to-month changes in performance that some property managers are seeing. So really, a couple of things. From a revenue standpoint, though, in driving revenue or go to market, thinking, an area that I focus on, marketing and sales, there's really three levers that property managers, any business owner should really stay focused on. And they're the three key drivers of pushing revenue, increasing revenue. The first is demand. And we know in our market that demand overall is down. So that means for property managers to try and increase demand or fight against that downward trend, it's going to take more effort, more investment, more creativity. And so thinking through demand, that's going to be a tough one. The second lever is conversion. How well does your website, does your team convert the demand that you do get? And that's one of the huge areas that I see there's opportunity for. We just have to get better. We have to pay more attention to the details. And there's some interesting new tech that I've been recommending property managers take a look at to help improve their website's ability to convert visitors to actual bookings. And then the third thing is rates, ADRs. And we know from Jason's presentation a couple episodes ago that rates are still fairly strong. He mentioned there are some property managers who, are dropping rates to try and be aggressive to capture those bookings before their competitors do, get those locked in so they've got some visibility into cash flows moving forward because of all the increases in costs. So yeah, those three things with ADRs, there is some opportunity in ADR, I think, to drop that to help drive bookings. Demand is going to be a tough one. But, making sure, I've got some ideas around that I've shared, and I'm happy to share here in more detail, but also focusing on conversion and what you actually do with that demand. Yielding a few more percentage points of conversion out of the demand that you are getting can have a material impact on your revenue. It could be hundreds of thousands of dollars in improvement in a monthly revenue statement. So definitely an area worth focusing in on.
So Miriam, in Gatlinburg Pigeon Forge, kind of runs the gambit from rent by owner to unsophisticated owner to some really first-class, first-rate competitors who are doing things right. As we kind of index with key data, and obviously we obviously know what our data is. For the summer, we've still kept rates high. So I just looked at our data. We're off for 2024 versus 2023. We're only down 1% on rates. So that's consistent with Jason Sprinkle said about only a slight decrease in ADR to date. We've also tried to be careful with booking rolls. But the downside of all this, and the other thing is we've seen day of booking arrival decrease by at least certain markets 30%. So that means the booking window is really shrinking. But that means you've got to be able to communicate to the owners because they could be freaked out if their calendar isn't anywhere near as filled as it was in the past. And they could really almost want to fire you if they don't buy into your revenue strategy.
No, absolutely. And I think it's education. I think it starts with us as property managers talking to the owners, explaining, 3 years ago and even 2 years ago, individuals were booking 6, 7 months out. Now we're seeing that window of being 2 weeks, sometimes even a week out. But it also with explaining that conversation is having length of stay has significantly changed, in my market. So you look at it last year, year before last, you had the people from COVID being sick, travel was more, working at home, remote working and all that, being able to stay 4 to 7 nights. Well, guess what? We are back in this market, average length of stay 2 to 3 nights. Our ADR and holding that for summer, but dropping that length of stay is where I feel like has helped us with that 1%. Look, explaining that to an owner, in their mind is, are we going to have more problems with the home? How much impact does this have? Burning and turning them in. Right now, whatever income they can get is what needs to be the focus. And explaining you either want income or you want your house to sit. And having that balancing act and having that conversation from our standpoint, I have it on a daily basis right now.
Well, the good news for us, and we've been on record saying January and February 2024 were pretty big misses. I mean, January we didn't get the snow in our few ski destinations. Some places did, others did not. We did not, so that was unfortunate. Then Florida was abnormally cold January and February, and that certainly hurt getting any last minute arrivals for snowbirds because it just was not warm down here. March, on the other hand, seemingly has rebounded in a way, although Easter fell this year in March. But the one thing we didn't do is we didn't panic when it looked pretty grim, right? So we were almost $1.5 million off budget by about the first week of February, and there was real concerns about what to do. And what I said to the revenue management team is, don't panic yet. We'll slowly take ADRs down. will slowly open up booking rolls, but March is going to book, and we've gotten that missed down to well under 500,000, which meant, again, no surprise to you, Jeff, people were booking closer in. And part of that is, I think, credit card usage is so high at this point that people are waiting to put things on their credit card till the last minute. But I mean, this is a tough environment, and I'm sure that's one of the things clients are coming to you and asking you how to kind of market in this environment where all of a sudden you went from one extreme where some people were booking a year in advance because they were worried about going on vacation after COVID and everything was filled up, now to how do I manage my ADR, booking calendar, and booking rules when the booking window is shrinking.
Yeah, when travelers are more concerned about, they've got credit card debt that's piling up. They may not have as much income coming in. I've heard a lot of people who have been reemployed after being laid off, but they've had to take lesser jobs, lower titles, lower pay. There's a lot of that going on. And, lessons learned from previous downturns like this, where there were economic concerns, consumers were spending less, traveling less. A couple of keen insights that I recall, and all of this data actually came out of the Portrait of the American Traveler. It's a MMGY Insights study. They do panel survey of American consumer travelers. Some really great insights came out of that. I haven't seen their data in probably a couple of years since I was at Track. But one of the things I do remember about consumer behavior in these times is that they do travel. They cut back on the number of days, and we're seeing that in length of stays dropping. They also travel by airplane less. They look for close proximity destinations that they can road trip to and drive. And so one of my big suggestions for and recommendations for property managers is to dig into your data. Most everyone's got a CRM right now. You know where your bookings are coming from, where your guests live. You can do a simple geographic plot of where your bookings are coming from. In that one of those slides, it struck me how many travelers were coming from to various destinations were coming from neighboring states. And it makes me wonder if the road trip is coming back as a way to still be able to travel, still take some family vacation, but to lessen the financial burden of actually taking that. So if that's the case, that has real implications on where you might focus your marketing dollars and the types of activities that you do to drive more bookings in those areas. So I'd take a look at where your bookings are coming from guests, this year compared to previous years, and note any changes because I think that could be a strong indicator of where you might invest some additional marketing dollars in to drive more result.
So Miriam, I talked to Cleveland Research, and Matt over there said hotels also were experiencing on the leisure side a reduction versus forecast of 2024 in the U.S. market. And clearly, this is not just a vacation rental, it's a travel issue in the leisure sector of the U.S. So, we certainly can talk about the problem, but I don't think that gets us anywhere. So I want to kind of start to talk about solutions that people can do, because, that's what's important here. So one of the things I know you've done, you've got owners that report to you. And in some cases during COVID or after COVID, some of those owners started to dictate certain booking rules. They may say during summer, I want a 5-day booking rule or some things like that. How important is it to go back through the booking rules and just make sure that owners haven't hard-coded, those booking rules in a way where it really affects their ability to book the units? She's smiling.
I am smiling. Yes, I mean, you already know. I had this conversation last week. I think it's education, and I say this a lot, is explaining this to these owners, but then also making sure that we are on top of our stuff. Owners, again, during COVID, received max income amount, and then they wanted that, okay, we're not taking less than $300 a night. So if you set that in your system, but and you forget, because look, we all do. We all have a lot of units. We all carry on, but making sure, go back unit by unit, and that's for us as property managers. Hey, go in, check your units, see if they're pet friendly, do your analytical searches. What are the guests wanting in this market now? Private pools, being pet friendly are the two number one searches for the Sevier County. Going and having that conversation with your homeowners. I can do your rates, whatever, but there's a give and take. Let's make sure we are giving, the supplier what they want. And again, it goes back to having the tough conversations, but making sure you know what you're doing and what you're looking at to give your owner the most income, and not, as well as your business.
Yeah, Jeff. So what Miriam is saying is true, that we had during after COVID, really, owners who said no more pets, reduce the occupancy, increase the minimum length of stay, and then they forgot they told us this. It's hard overridden in the system, and you've got to go back into the database. So this gets back to something which a lot of owners in this industry aren't great at, which is database management.
Yep.
And really taking ownership of their database. In many cases, they let, the intern or the younger person, make changes into the database. In some cases, those people may have long since gone. Jeff, I mean, isn't that the first thing you do when you're talking to clients? Look under the hood, ask them to take a look at some of these things like booking rules, and are there overrides on ADR? Did they restrict pet units? Is their database set up properly where they've checked, that there's AC or hot water in the units? Because if not, they're not going to display even on Airbnb. The Airbnb has said flat out they won't display units that don't have hot water now.
Yeah, crazy, huh? The devil is in the detail, and when the tide's rising, all boats rise and float, and we get lazy, and homeowners start making demands that in other times, like you've said, are going to certainly limit our ability to rent those properties. So all of my clients that I start working with all start with an audit, and the idea of having a fresh set of eyes. Take a look at the current state of all those things, can really yield some important insights. There's usually a treasure trove of opportunity when you have the time to, whether you do it or whether you hire an external. There are so many specialty consultants available in our industry to help, whether it's from a distribution standpoint, whether it's from a revenue management standpoint, who understand all of the nuances of our industry. There's opportunity. You can learn something from having a fresh set of eyes come in and look at that business. So yes, getting in and understanding those details is usually a really good start. And then having an expert opinion on, hey, what should we attack first? What's the first thing we can do? We can't do all of this at once, particularly given our cash flow this year. So we have to be really prudent about where we invest. So understanding that data, understanding where your guests are, evaluating your listings, understanding where they shake out. What types of campaigns are you doing? Are there any new opportunities in your local markets or the markets that are driving most of your bookings this year? What are some other creative, unique guerrilla marketing type things you might be able to do locally that could really help drive even more demand for your business? But yeah, it's what guides my practice and the business I do with all of my clients, is that first initial audit and really getting a lay of the land and understanding, okay, these are going to be the highest value things we should invest in right now because we know they're going to have the biggest impact on the business.
What do you think is the number one thing that they should invest in? So a company comes to you that really doesn't have a ton of money, right, ton of cash flow. We have one thing that we can do. What would that be?
I wish there was a silver bullet, Miriam, because every company, particularly in our fragmented industry, everyone runs their business so differently, and they all generally, traditionally, have an area or two or three of specialty, and that might be in distribution and working with the OTAs, for example. It might be in doing direct booking marketing. So it really is across the board, and it is a case by case basis. But what I can say is, really making sure you understand your guests and where they're coming from and what they expect and what they're searching for. There's some new incredible tech out there that can help you develop your direct channel and actually drive a much larger share. I've been recently looking at website load speeds, both desktop and mobile, for our industry, and the statistics are shocking. Nearly half of consumers will leave a site if it doesn't load in less than 4 seconds. And yet the average load speed for a travel website is 6.7 seconds. On mobile, it's 8.9 seconds. And in a world of instant gratification and where the best experience on the best app or website, think of how many billions of dollars are spent by the big boys on optimizing that experience. Well, guess what? That now becomes the expectation for your website and every website that they visit. And if it's not there, and it's very likely not, you've got to come up with ways to overcome that deficit, because you'll never catch Booking or Expedia or Vrbo or all of the brands that invest so much in UI and UX and that experience. So really understanding and making sure you're maximizing the opportunity. So a fast website, a very straight line, as few clicks as you can to get to a booking. There's some new tools, a comparison pricing tool, Booking Insights, for example, that's launched for vacation, specifically for vacation rentals. On your website, it will automatically pull pricing for that same unit on several of the OTAs, Vrbo, and I think what's the other? Airbnb, of course. I think there was one other, but anyway, all of that can empower the consumer, the guest, right then to keep them on your site, keep them from shopping around and potentially finding a better deal by promising and showing them proof that they're going to get the best price here. So pricing strategy plays into this, understanding where you are in relation to your competition. So having good market data, whether it be key data, and certainly analyzing all of your data, understanding your guests, just some really important strategies to really yield as much actual revenue and bookings from even the diminished demand you're getting. You can make up a lot of that deficit in demand by just converting a few more percentage points of the demand that you are getting.
So Miriam, I know we were up there and we were talking about some properties were booking and some weren't, even in the same complex. And sometimes it was a mystery. And I know one of the things you do as soon as you get an owner who says, hey, our numbers are off, is look in the database and just take a look, the photos. Some cases, some of the photos are so high res, and if they're not being compressed, that could literally slow down the site, or it may not even be the right photo order. The other thing is, and we've taken an initiative to chop down copy significantly. We used to do long copy, and now we've gone to short, and people just don't have time to read this stuff. But then just this idea of checking all the amenities, like people in this country just don't understand how important it is for the OTAs to distribute. That if you don't click the little box for Wi-Fi because you just assume everybody knows you have Wi-Fi, or you don't click the little box for central AC, or you don't click the little box for hot water, you may literally either A, not get distributed, or you may fall in the algorithm, because what Airbnb and to a lesser extent Vrbo are doing is they have algorithms set up on a worldwide index, and not every unit in the world has Wi-Fi. Not every unit in the world has hot water. Not every unit in the world has a washer and dryer. So if you don't check those boxes affirming that you have those in there, you will fall in the algorithm. So Miriam, when you look under the hood and you start to take a look at some of these properties, how often do you see just stuff wasn't set up, or shockingly, little boxes aren't properly checked?
It would be more than you would think. Unfortunately, and I think it's because everything is a click base. So when you put a lot of people having to be hands-on and to touch, I think that's the biggest key. And I think that's the big key for everyone on this is when there's a red flag, you have to dig into You have to, like he said, look at photos, look at length of stay, look at ADR, look at the description. And I think, again, it goes back, and I've said it 5 times today, the education. I have an owner right now who called 15 minutes before we started this thing, and he wants his description long. And so I had 5 minutes. It's like, look, no one reads. If they can't swap it, they're not looking at it. But having that education of the photos matter, making sure you have, for us, it's good bedding. It's the curb appeal. It's that first attraction, making sure you have, again, what they want. And then for us, going in, making sure all the boxes, from being able to work remote. It doesn't matter, as long as you can set your laptop. I think Chad, I call him my revenue nightmare, but that's what he's like, look, if you can set your laptop anywhere, you can work remote. That was a box. Like, I had no idea. It was like, they don't have this stuff. He's like, Miriam, where do you set your laptop? I'm like, on my lap. He said, then you can check this box, right? And I think that's the biggest thing, going in step by step and making sure everything is adequate from how it reads in your database. But look, also making sure that from your CRM, it contributes correctly on Airbnb, VRBO, because there are times when your feed is not always correct on other stuff. So there may be actually a bigger issue, confirming the software is correct, that we've checked all the boxes, but also making sure the data displays correctly on the other listing sites.
I would love to add a little comment about photos, because I saw some interesting data just this morning. My friend Christian Thorson, former owner of Chattanooga Vacation Rentals, he's now a drone operator, got his license, and is out doing all kinds of wonderful things for both marketing, but many other operational reasons using drones. And he shared some data that he found, or was pulled from AirDNA and maybe the Journal of Vacation Marketing. We'd have to look into this data, but it suggests that having aerial photography of homes from a drone improves, let's see, an average of 50, a home with aerial photos receives an average of 58% more bookings and earned 31% higher nightly rates than properties without aerial photos. And that seems to align with what's all the data from the real estate sales side that also has a very similar type result. So whether it's just basic, I'll say basic, but professional photography, we know that has an impact on the allure and a engaging description and photos of a particular property. It might be worth looking into aerial photography as a possible addition to test that, see if it's going to help you actually book more nights in those homes.
So we actually do area photography.
So
we do. And I'll tell you why, because guests want to know, how close is someone else to them? Am I in a resort? Is there a house directly beside of me? Well, look, you can't hodgepodge that. If you do, it's very easy to see, because on the listing sites, the grain of the photos. So it's crazy.
Yeah. Actually, that's a good point. I happened to be staying a rental last week in Mexico, and the pictures of the home were very nice. But they were all interior and close exterior shots. Well, it was in the middle of the hood. I mean, it was a dangerous area. They kept claiming it was safe, and I'd say, well, why are all the windows and gates, doors gated and have bars on them? I mean, it was it was a little shocking. Everything went fine, but it's a little unnerving, and certainly an aerial photo. Maybe that's why they're not doing aerial photography. But still.
But I think I think you will see it more as the new norm of having that aerial photography on everything.
Yeah. Give the guests what they're looking for to choose the right home. Remember, these are, the vacation is still a complex, considered purchase. The planners need to get it right for their family. If it's a multi-generational or a group of families getting together, there's some personal pride on the line in finding the right house, the right place to stay. So giving them the information they need to make a smart decision and look good can really be valuable, I think.
Yeah, so I also want to mention how important headlines are, particularly given that people aren't really reading a whole lot more than the headline and looking at the photos. And for those who don't really look at things, you've got to really reduce to about 70 characters what your headline is. Instead of using the word bedroom, use BR. Instead of bathrooms, use BA. You can save a lot of space by abbreviating, but you need to be able to make sure that the key features of the property, whether it's pool, a view, are in there. And also people like to see the words Wi-Fi, et cetera. So, we've done that and that's effective. But Jeff, I wanted to ask you also about how important it is to run promos and to run campaigns, because that's another thing that people got out of the habit of.
Yep.
And those things work, running flash sales, running, sending people coupons, having things like that. Now your website has to actually work to be able to accept the coupon code, but those things really are effective right now.
They are, and it's a really opportune time, I think, to test several different types of promos. There's it's hard once you start taking rate down to build that back up quickly. So I know the hotels did this back in 08, 09, or was it 2012? I'm trying to remember one of the last big downturns. The hotels that, dropped their pants on price to try and generate demand. They did a little bit, but at that, in a really strong downturn, it's hard to generate more demand by lowering price. All it does is damage your brand and set the expectation that you're going to continue to do this. So if you are going to lower price, specials are a wonderful way to do that. Another option, which I think is worth testing in this environment, particularly as the length of stays are coming down, that's driven traditionally by folks unable or unwilling to pay for that extra fifth and sixth night or seventh night on a week. So what if you were to, run your numbers, see where your break point is or your average length of stay is, and if it's 5 days or 6 days, why don't you create a special where book 5 days, get a sixth night free, and that could, without dropping price or ADR as much as you might have to. There's a lot of different ways you can play with that, but yes, promos are such a valuable way. Make sure you're hitting your in-house guests with specials to rebook for next year's vacation and some advantageous price. I know a lot of folks did that. Some may have gotten away from that, knowing that demand's fine, we'll be able to fill these homes at full price. But you must take advantage of everything you can to not only drive some new visitors, but secure those repeat visits from folks who have been loyal to you in the past.
I think something we've done that we've seen in this market be successful is reaching out to the in-house guest that is currently there, or coming in and saying, hey, do you want to add on the night before, or what time are you going to get here? We can get you in for X amount of money. And even extending, hey, they may actually not want to stay that whole another day, but they may not check out or something till 2 o'clock. Well, cutting that and giving that as an option, we've been really successful at. So
yeah, that's particularly if more and more people, I think Gatlinburg's a pretty strong drive-to market. So when people drive, they've got more flexibility to be able to add an extra night on at the end. Perhaps change their plans if you're able, stay on top of those gap nights. If you've got gap nights, there's no better person to fill one of those gap nights than the one who's in the house right now. So I think I love that idea. I think it's a great one.
Okay, well, we've given everybody a lot of different tips for direct business. V-Trips has been happy where we're at. We're about 60%, direct versus 40% OTA. So we think that's a healthy mix.
Yep.
But let's now talk about our friends, the OTAs, because, there is a way to leverage the OTAs to pick up incremental business. However, the share shift is pretty dramatic. And I think that's one of the other issues that's really hurting or causing concern and panic in the industry, is what's happened with share shift. So obviously, Jeff, you and I remember when probably when HomeAway bought Verbo, and Verbo was wheeled into HomeAway and became really the engine that drove the company and really drove the industry for years. I mean, there were companies who 90% of their OTA business was from the HomeAway / Verbo channel, and it's been declining. Last year it declined, and even though they said in their earning call that they were spending more marketing dollars, our data is indicated it's declined again for January and February, down 11%. Meanwhile, Airbnb is up shockingly 77% year over year. So Airbnb has filled in the gap where Verbo has lost. Jeff, how important is it to be on top of this? Because you've got companies in some cases that aren't even on Airbnb.
Yeah, it's hugely important. As I mentioned earlier, evaluating, staying on top of your distribution strategy, making sure you don't have all your eggs in one basket. We are in definitely different times from when, back in the day when Verbo and Verbo and HomeAway were strong drivers, not only of revenue, but of profitability, those 7-day stays. It's also, as you evaluate channels, I think, it's one thing to replace the volume of bookings from, say, a Verbo to an Airbnb, but from what I've seen and what I understand, the quality of those bookings can be very different. Airbnb traditionally has been more of, I'll say a younger generation who stays less, longer weekends, 3 or 4 days, rather than the full 7-day, family type getaway that Verbo has traditionally marketed towards and served. So while you may be, you need to look at a couple of things. And one of the metrics that I recommend my clients take a look at is, obviously revenue per booking. Because even though you may replace the same number of bookings by moving from Verbo to Airbnb or any other channel for that matter, I'm not just picking on them in this particular instance. I've seen the data though, for this particular instance, the revenue per booking has dropped, 20-25% by shifting those bookings to shorter lengths of stay on Airbnb, for example. So the health of those bookings and the channels that you use, you've got to constantly keep a finger on that pulse. You've got to test, you've got to manage, and most importantly, set expectations as you manage your distribution strategy and shift. But you've got to find some activity is better than none for homeowners, right? Yeah, at least you've got some people in there. You may not, you may have them in there for 4 days instead of 6 days, but at least it's some revenue. And I think it's indicative of the overall economic climate as a whole, and sort of where some of that consumer resistance is to booking some of these longer stays.
Well, Miriam, the Airbnb customer is definitely different, right? They book closer in. They tend to go for smaller properties. Clearly, they're younger. But with Verbo really tanking, isn't it critical to make sure that you're working with Airbnb and in general that you have a direct connection? Because I mean, it's incredible now how much Airbnb is making up in some of our markets, and we are not even urban. We don't have urban locations. These are all traditional resort and beaches.
I think it's having that good connection, having, look, we have a great rapport. I probably don't with Airbnb, but our people who talk to them every day do. But no, it matters. Making sure that you're giving that same atmosphere out, right? If you look at it, and I think Jeff actually has said it way better today than I normally say it, talk about the younger crowd booking on the Airbnb and all that, but it matters because it's the length of stay. It all goes back to these simple things that I think people are missing. Making sure you are giving the guest what they want, shorter stays, making sure the ADR is correct, but also the different platforms. Look, VRBO we know is tanking in some markets. I definitely think that will change. I may be wrong. I'm advocate big time for these guys. So if you need something, let us know. We're here to help. Just because the relationship, what we've seen in the past or my experiences with Airbnb and how that outcome could possibly be affects more than we want to talk about, right? However, making sure you have the different platforms to be able to have guests to be able to book is huge.
Well, Jeff, we bought quite a few companies between 21 and 2022.
Yep.
70% of the companies we purchased were not on Airbnb or Booking.com. And I remember having discussions with the principals of those companies who sold them to me, and they said, we don't like those channels. They're too difficult to work with. And I said, well, right now, all your eggs are in one basket. And these owners would say, well, Airbnb is merchant of record, and Booking.com, we have to go through a channel manager, and Vrbo offers subscription. And I said, again, you do not want all your eggs in the same basket. It's dangerous. So 2 years ago, it wasn't very popular, but I told every division they had to be on all these channels. We're also on Homes to Go, SmokyMountain.com, which does really well up in Gatlinburg, and well, they're miscellaneous ones. But what I'm hearing on the Vrbo side is pretty disturbing. One, without really a lot of notice, they increased their subscription rate from $5.99 to $6.99 as of February 1st. That in and of itself should have gotten more attention, and that kind of caught us by surprise. But the second thing we're told was subscription is going to end. They're definitely going to end subscription. They told us summer, maybe it'll be end of year. And then the third thing, which was the most shocking and will have the most ramification on the industry, is that Vrbo is going to go to merchant of record. And what that means is, instead of the way Vrbo works with most integrated property managers, the payment comes to you as soon as that booking happens. It'll go to Vrbo, and they will sit on that cash for as long as it takes, and then they'll release it. I'm not even sure if they'll release it at arrival, but it might be at departure. But these are huge changes, and for those companies that sat on their hands and didn't diversify, these are going to hit those companies hard.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that last bit. That's a merchant of record change. That's a fairly meaningful impact on cash flows. I mean, think about that. I mean, I guess as booking windows come down, the delay in your cash will be less, but damn, for those bookings that are 6 months out, you've got to wait to fund your operation, that booking cash until arrival or departure. Yeah, that's a dramatic change, and could materially impact the financing of many operators out there to carry those expenses until revenue is recognized.
Well, it could be devastating for areas like North Carolina, who have taken large distribution payments by law out of proceeds and advanced them to owners. And their cash flow could potentially get cut off if they literally don't get advanced until the summer. Some winter markets where they get people to book a year in advance, if they have played games with their trust account and they're upside down, they literally go out of business. These places with the more advanced bookings you get, and the larger your length of stay is, the more this impacts you. And Miriam, this is going to be a big problem for these companies who, during the good times, all they did was spend money. They bought nice trucks, they bought vehicles. I've seen their purses. I've seen the guys' watches at these conferences. I mean, it's unbelievable. Do you believe all the swag you see these people? I mean, these handbags. I saw one person, Heather said, I think that's a $50,000 handbag. Can you believe this?
Listen, it makes me feel very poor. I'm like, what am I doing? Like, Steve, I need more money. I think you're seeing that, but I think you're also going to see the smaller organizations that have really only had, like he said, been focused on the VRBO. They're going to go under. If this happens, the merchant record goes to this, and that is their only platform. How can they survive that? Because again, like he said, I'm seeing it here. They're driving brand new vehicles, and we all know this year is not going to be great. And I passed a group today had a fleet of 5 new vehicles. I mean, this company has 300 properties. That's it. I know that they're only listed on their website and VRBO If that happens, where will that leave them?
Well,
That's
Jeff,
all I know.
Wow.
And this is not going to be an accounting session today, but I mean, I've been saying over and over again how important it was to have a budget. Not
Yep.
only do we have budget, we're running weekly and monthly cash flow all the way through first quarter 2025, just to take a look at impacts such as the change of merchant of record, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we do have a line of credit, but the time to get the line of credit was probably a couple years ago. I
Yeah.
don't that if you don't have financials right now, you're not going to get a line of credit. So, typically if you're running a company the right way and it's a P&L, I mean, your maximum profitability is going to happen during the summer. And then, during the winter, you're going to lose money, quote unquote. I mean, that's just typically how it works unless you're in a ski market, but you have to have budgets. And if all you've done over the past couple of years is just distribute out cash to yourselves in the form of either real, income distribution or all the toys that you've purchased for yourself and your staff and trips to salons and trips on vacations and all these crazy things,
Yep.
you're probably facing a pretty dire situation come August when you have to make July owner payouts.
Yeah, if you haven't started tightly managing expenses, and this is something we all talked about on the few webinars we did a few months ago on sort of revenue growth strategies for 2024 and expense management tactics and strategies. If you're not in there yet, boy, you're late. You need to get in there and understand how you're going to be able to better manage your organization, curtail some of this frivolous spending, and again, prioritize where you invest your precious resources. All of these changes, if you've got a significant portion of your distribution through Verbo and they come out and they make this change, seriously, that is a threat. I think a serious threat to the solvency of many operators out there. So making sure you're tightening it up. Budgets are one of the best ways. I am still amazed. Too many folks in our business, in our industry, rely on their gut and how they feel. And boy, that's a really detrimental way to tightly manage a profitable business and one that's going to survive the downturns and, more importantly, thrive when things are getting good. So, I would say if you haven't already started to do that, you better jump on it immediately, because there's a storm brewing and it's coming.
Miriam, you have to be astonished when you look at Facebook or LinkedIn and you see people and they're posting from VRMA Paris and they're saying, "Oh, I'm here," and you're thinking, how are you affording these trips in this deteriorating environment? And what are you actually even going to learn from going to Paris? I mean, one of the things obviously at V-Trips we've done is we completely reduced T&E, travel entertainment, because again, we're trying to tighten our belt to get through this. I mean, this is going to be a tough time. We have an election year. I mean, Miriam, there's people that think it's going to be better the second half of the year. Why would anyone who suffered through 2020 or 2016 believe that during an election year, consumers are somehow going to want to spend money when there's all this craziness going on? Tell me why they won't.
Because they weren't in the market then. So they're new and they've not went through this. I think that's the biggest thing. For us, we've been through this. We know, and you say the T&E, but that crap going to Paris for that was all for entertainment. That was a show. There was nothing learned or nothing that you brought back that attributed to what we're fixing to face. And I think that's the biggest thing is these shows are put on, but it's for everybody to get together right now to have a good time and party and show their Chanel bag that I can't afford. But I think I think it goes back to, if you were in the times 5-10 years ago, you have tightened your budget. You have we're not traveling, we're not doing exponential things that's not going to increase our revenue and make a substantial difference. That's why they're doing it. But the people who are sitting tight and not traveling and wasting money, well, guess what? We're going to be here in 2 years, still thriving, and probably purchased your business. Maybe your handbag. I don't know yet. Steve, buy me a company with the good purses.
Those purses are an investment, right? That's what Heather's telling me. She's trying to convince me to buy one for her.
Yeah. You know, I was, I don't know if this is indicative of our economic state, overall macroeconomics here in the country, but I was in early March, I was in Vegas, and it happened to be during one of the big builders conferences. And I was playing poker, sitting at a table with several builders, and more importantly, several trucking firm representatives. And both of those industries, which are backbones of our economy, are down dramatically this year. The volume of trucking has dropped. The number of new construction starts is seriously impacting their industry, even though some markets are seeing some growth. So I'm a little less certain now that we're going to have a softer landing, as many folks have been talking about, because these seem to me like some potentially, leading indicators that, gosh, there is still more pain to be felt overall from the American consumer and just our overall economy. So yeah, it really is good advice to pay particular attention, get into the details, manage your business tightly, and it's certainly going to help you weather the storm.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that you can do that will translate is G&A savings. But again, I mean, we've been working on G&A savings for the last 2 years, right? Including rent reductions. I mean, these things don't happen overnight. You have to start planning for it. I'm afraid that there's just a group of companies and people, some of who post on LinkedIn a lot, they're just not going to be around, because if you haven't been operating your business in a fundamentally financially prudent way, it's almost impossible at this point to pivot, because I am not optimistic this fall is going to be good. In fact, I'm pessimistic. I think everything I'm seeing is, given that it's a political election, it's going to be highly contested. People will stop spending. They're going to stop spending. People are going to be scared. When people are afraid, guess what they do? They stop spending money. And then it takes them time before their confidence come back. They spend money again. And if it's a close contested election and results aren't known for a couple of weeks, that prolongs it even through Thanksgiving and maybe into Christmas. It could be brutal in the second half of the year if things materialize that. I guess we can all wish that whoever wins in such a convincing way that, we don't have to think about it for, days, weeks after. But I mean, Jeff, I guess what you're saying and what I'm saying and what Miriam is saying is everybody needs to be focused on getting as much as they can now, but really focusing on their expenses, because there's some dramatic changes coming. If this Verbo thing happens in the summer, and I've heard contradictory information, maybe it's later in the year, but that is going to be a dramatic cash flow change. And I mean, the booking window shrinking, that reduces cash flow. None of this is good. The only thing you can do is reduce your costs, get back to the basics, and get hands-on. Because in order to be an owner and pay your payroll, you have to have enough cash coming in. Otherwise, you will literally go out of business, and that's just not where you want to be. You don't want to be in August or September sitting there not being able to pay your owners. And I know you heard all this. It's terrible when you hear these stories.
Yeah, I think it's time for a startup mindset, even for the oldest OGs in our, operators in our industry. You have to understand your burn rate. You have to understand how demand, all the market signals that are coming in, so that you can forecast and look ahead to smooth out your road as much as you possibly can. There'll always be variables, but having tight controls and understanding that, introducing and creating degrees of freedom that give you opportunities to pivot at multiple points should the economy or your business go one way or the other. You need to be prepared.
All right, Miriam, I need you to give me something optimistic. Give some sunshine, some light of hope. This got really dark.
This is like Debbie Downer right now. Good news. I honestly look. I'm going to be pessimistic here. I think that if we can get through summer, Rob, I think summer's going to be the test. You know, everybody's concerned about the third and fourth quarter. I think if we, as a whole group, right, we price summer correctly, we still leave some people with some funds that they can come in the fall. I think that's the biggest thing. I think everybody's right. I think people are going to be scared to death. Travel is going to be the thing they cut out first. When money gets tight, travel is that. Look, we can talk about it, whatever. The light at the end of the tunnel is if we do this correctly, we tighten up now. I think, you know, towards Christmas, towards Thanksgiving, we may be okay rate-wise, economy-wise, if we buckle down now.
All right. Well, we're going to leave that on that optimistic, pray for a Christmas miracle from Miriam, and 2025 will be better. So some optimism from the folks at Straight Fire VR. Well, thanks again for everyone. You can see previous episodes on our website, straightfirevr.com. Thank you again.